Welcome to the Y20 Australia 2014 OurSay Forum with Senator the Honourable Brett Mason, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. My name is Sobels and I'm one of the 5 young people selected to represent Australia at the Youth 20 or Y20. The Y20 is one of 5 official engagement groups of the G20, the group of 20 leaders of the world's biggest economies. This year Australia holds the presidency of the G20. The Y20 is fast approaching. This coming weekend, 120 delegates from around the world will convene in Sydney. There we will discuss pressing economic issues and how they specifically affect young people. As part of this G20 process, our world leaders will receive our recommendations and consider how they can act on the challenges facing the world's young people. Over recent months, the Y20 Australian delegation has been consulting widely with the youth of Australia. We have heard that among the issues that you want addressed are youth unemployment, building a sustainable economy and lifting the barriers to youth entrepreneurs. Today, in partnership with OurSay, we are bringing you just some of the questions that you want answered. I'd like to thank Senator Mason for joining us here today.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks for having me, Laura.
Our first question comes from David. He asks, it is said that a conservative estimate of the economic cost of suicide and attempted suicides in Australia is $17.5 billion per annum. I would estimate this at far more, not to mention the emotional costs to loved ones, which cannot be measured. It is sad to have to put the cost of life into a number, as in reality the cost of life cannot be measured. But it seems to be the only way to get action. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death for young people in Australia aged 15 to 24. In our regional and remote communities where some of our most disadvantaged young people are, the rate can be more than twice that of those in city areas. This is also the case in other countries. Most suicides are preventable with the required social and emotional well-being, family support services and education in place. This is an ongoing issue which remains largely unaddressed. What will be done to fund programs across Australia, particularly in regional and remote areas, and indeed across the world, to ensure our young people are given the best possible chance at life?
Well, that's a very sobering question. I think suicide has touched many young people, indeed many of us. Many years ago now, when I was studying at university overseas, a friend of mine committed suicide, and it's something you never forget. And so governments take an interest in this for economic reasons, of course. It is expensive, but also for emotional reasons. We are doing a bit. Governments of all persuasions have done a lot in recent years in the area of mental health, and there are specific programs for young people, Headspace, and there's a new Centre for Excellence for mental health for young people. There's an e-platform now, of course. But more importantly, it's a matter of spreading the message that about 3/4 of the issues relating to mental health occur with people under 25. And more than 1 in every 5 Australians will actually suffer from mental health problems at some stage in their lives. And just getting that message out there and the fact that it isn't something to be hidden is the trick. But it isn't just about governments, Laura. It's not just about what governments should do. That's part of the issue, but it's also about how we should respond to our friends in need. And rather than laugh at friends or dismiss them, it might be better to embrace them and ask about them. So, I can just recommend that people, of course, seek help if they have difficulties. But it is a continuing issue in Australia. You're quite right, particularly for young people and particularly for Indigenous young people. But governments of all persuasions are looking at it. But as I say, it's a responsibility for governments, but also for every Australian.
Senator, our next question comes from Sarah. She asks, climate change is a critical global economic issue and Australia's lack of commitment in this area is embarrassing for my generation. How will Australia's presidency of the G20 provide a platform for the discussion of this important issue? What climate change policies will Australia be bringing to the G20 and how do these compare to the policies of other G20 states?
Laura, the G20 tends to be about economic growth and economic resilience. And it's already a pretty crowded agenda. But it's a good question and a very worthy question. But there'll be 2 conferences later this year that will be dedicated to climate change and what to do about it. One in New York, I think, in September, and then, of course, in Peru in December. and they will be addressing the issues and how we're going to actually tackle the problem of climate change. Australia's commitment is, well, it's public, you know what it is, and that is, of course, is to ensure that we cut by 2020 our 2000 emissions by 5%. However, with the caveat that by next year, by 2015, if there's global movement, sufficient global movement, we can readjust those targets and perhaps target for a greater reduction in emissions. So it's not a static commitment. It will depend upon what others do, but it's a global problem with a global solution. But Australia will play its part.
Senator, our last question is from Emil. He asks, what will the work of the G20 and Y20, particularly given Australia as the 2014 host, contribute to Australian innovation and its technology and startup industries? What practical measures will help early stage, innovative companies compete globally and maintain a strong presence in Australia?
It's a good question. It's about economic growth is so much about innovation today. Let's face it, that the link between research, whether by universities or by business, with innovation, of course, then is linked ultimately to productivity. And the only way that Australia can remain competitive and maintain its standard of living, of course, is to become more productive, and that's through innovation. So the government's established a program for entrepreneurs, entrepreneur infrastructure program, worth several $100 million over the next 4 years, and that's really to better commercialise innovation with business opportunities. So to try to marry those two concepts up. It's not always easy because too much of our great intellectual property goes offshore, but this will hopefully save much of it for Australian businesses. And it's a very good question because it underscores so much of what Australia has to become, and that is more tech savvy, of course, more entrepreneurial and more innovative.
Well, thank you very much for answering those questions and being here today, Senator.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks very much.